I've been driving 18-wheelers for about 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Wrong. What happened to me 3 weeks ago, near the Arizona-New Mexico border, still keeps me up at night, and I can't shake this feeling that I'm being watched wherever I go. I keep telling myself it was just bad luck, but there's something about that whole situation that doesn't sit right with me. The more I think about it, the more convinced I become that I was targeted from the start. I've driven through that stretch of desert highway probably 100 times, but I'd never stopped at that particular gas station before. Hell, I didn't even know it existed until my fuel gauge started flashing red, and I realized I had no choice. It was one of those decisions you make in a split second that ends up changing everything. I was hauling a full trailer of high-end sporting equipment, Nike shoes, Under Armour gear, expensive camping equipment worth about $200,000 retail. The kind of load that makes you extra paranoid about security, especially when you're driving solo through the middle of nowhere. I had all the proper seals, GPS tracking, the works, but none of that mattered in the end. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I saw the exit sign, barely visible in my headlights. Desert Rose, Travel Center, next right. The name sounded friendly enough, but when I pulled off the interstate, my heart sank. This wasn't one of those big well-lit truck stops with security cameras and other drivers around. It was just a small, run-down gas station with maybe 4 pumps, sitting alone in the desert like something out of a horror movie. The only light came from a few flickering fluorescent bulbs that cast these eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt. There wasn't another soul in sight, no other trucks, no cars, nothing. Just me and this creepy little building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The wind was howling through the desert, making this low whistling sound that gave me goosebumps. I sat in my cab for a minute, debating whether to risk running out of fuel trying to make it to the next station. But my tank was practically empty, and I didn't have a choice. I remember thinking how weird it was that a gas station would be open this late, in the middle of nowhere, but I was desperate. As I climbed down from my cab, I could hear my boots echoing on the pavement. And that's when I noticed something that should have been a red flag. There were no security cameras visible anywhere. Asterisk, the gas pumps looked ancient, like something from decades ago, but they worked when I swiped my company card. While my tanks were filling, I kept looking around, trying to shake this uneasy feeling in my gut. The building had these big windows, but they were so dirty and covered with old advertisements that I could barely see inside. There was a neon, open sign buzzing in the window, casting this sickly red glow across everything. I could make out someone moving around behind the counter, but they looked more like a shadow than an actual person. The whole place had this abandoned feel to it, like it was barely hanging on to existence. I checked my trailer locks twice while the fuel was pumping. Everything seemed secure. The GPS tracker on my phone showed I was about 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but empty desert. When the pump finally clicked off, I had spent almost 20 minutes just standing there in that creepy silence, listening to the wind and the occasional car passing by on the interstate in the distance. I grabbed my wallet and headed toward the building, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as I walked across that cracked parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the darkness beyond the reach of those dim lights. The inside of the station was even worse than the outside. The floors were sticky, covered in years of grime, and half the overhead lights were burnt out. There was this musty smell mixed with stale cigarette smoke that hit me as soon as I walked through the door. The guy behind the counter was probably in his 60s, with greasy gray hair and these small, dark eyes that seemed to look right through me. He didn't say hello or acknowledge me at all, just stared at me with this blank expression that made my skin crawl. The shelves were barely stocked, a few bags of chips, some energy drinks, basic truck stop stuff. But everything looked old and dusty. There was country music playing softly from a radio somewhere, but it was all static and barely audible. I grabbed a coffee from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there all day and walked up to pay for my fuel. The whole transaction took maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like forever. The guy never spoke, just took my money and gave me change without making eye contact. As I was leaving, I noticed he had picked up an old cordless phone and was dialing a number. At the time, I figured he was just making a personal call, but now I wonder if he was calling someone to let them know I was leaving. The thought still gives me chills. When I walked back outside, everything looked exactly the same as when I'd left it. My truck was sitting there under those flickering lights, trailer still attached, everything appearing normal. I did my usual routine, walked around the entire rig, checking the tires, the connections, the trailer doors. The seals looked untouched. The padlocks were all in place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but something felt different, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Maybe it was just my nerves from being in that creepy place, but the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I climbed back into my cab and started the engine, eager to get back on the road and put some distance between me and that place. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my side mirror and saw that old man standing in the doorway of the station, just watching me drive away. There was something about his posture, the way he was just standing there motionless, that made me press down harder on the accelerator. I merged back onto the interstate and tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it was just a normal stop at a rundown gas station, but I couldn't shake the image of that guy's dead stare. And I found myself checking my mirrors more than usual as I drove through the darkness. I'd made it about 60 miles down the road before I decided to pull over at a well-lit rest area to grab some sleep. It was nearly 1 a.m. and I was exhausted from the stress of that weird stop. The rest area was one of those standard highway stops with bathrooms, picnic tables, and plenty of lighting, the complete opposite of where I'd just been. There were a few other trucks parked there, which made me feel more comfortable. I backed into a spot, set my alarm for 6 a.m. and tried to get some rest, but every little sound outside had me looking out my windows. A car door slamming, footsteps on gravel, even the wind rustling through the trees. Everything seemed amplified in the darkness. I must have dozed off around 2:30 a.m., but it wasn't peaceful sleep. I kept having these weird dreams about that gas station, about the old man behind the counter, about shadows moving around my truck. When my alarm went off, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I climbed down to do my pre-trip inspection, just like I do every morning, walking around the entire rig and checking everything. That's when I saw it. Fresh scratches around the lock on my trailer doors, and the security seal had been cut and replaced with what looked like an identical one. My heart started pounding as I realized what had happened. I stood there for a full minute, just staring at that fake seal, trying to process what I was seeing. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys to unlock the trailer doors. The scratches around the lock were fresh. You could tell they'd been made recently because there was still metal dust on the ground. When I finally got the doors open and looked inside, my worst fears were confirmed. The trailer was maybe 30% empty. They'd taken the most valuable stuff, all the Nike shoes, the premium camping gear, probably 50 or 60 pallets worth of merchandise. But here's the thing that really messed with my head. They'd rearranged everything that was left to make it look full from the outside. They'd moved pallets around, stacked boxes differently, even put empty boxes in strategic places so that if you just glanced inside, it would look like nothing was missing. This wasn't some random theft by desperate junkies. These people knew exactly what they were doing, and they'd done it before. I immediately called my dispatcher, then the police, but I already knew this was going to be a nightmare. The GPS tracker on the trailer hadn't shown any tampering alerts, which meant they'd somehow disabled it without triggering the system. I felt sick to my stomach, not just because of the stolen cargo, but because I realized I'd been set up from the moment I pulled into that gas station. The state police showed up about an hour later, and I spent the next 4 hours going through everything with them. They took photos, dusted for fingerprints, asked me to describe every detail I could remember about the gas station and the old man behind the counter. But when they called the station to verify my story, the phone number was disconnected. That's when things got really weird. The officer told me they'd send someone to check out the location, but when they got there the next day, they found the building completely abandoned. Not just closed, abandoned, like it had been empty for months. The pumps were turned off, the windows were boarded up, and there was no sign that anyone had been there recently. The local sheriff said the place had been shut down for over a year due to environmental violations. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. I'd bought gas there, talked to that creepy old man, spent 20 minutes at those pumps. The whole thing was impossible, but it had happened. The insurance company launched their own investigation, and my company suspended me pending the outcome. 3 weeks later, I'm still trying to make sense of it all, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm losing my mind. But I know what happened that night, even if nobody believes me. The insurance investigator was this no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who'd probably seen every kind of freight theft scam in the book. She went through my story with a fine-tooth comb, asking the same questions over and over, looking for inconsistencies. She kept focusing on the timing, how long I was inside the station, whether I'd seen any other vehicles, if I'd noticed anyone following me. The thing that bothered her most was the fact that the thieves had somehow known exactly what was in my trailer. They didn't just grab random stuff. They took the most expensive items and left behind the cheaper merchandise. She pointed out that this suggested inside information, someone who had access to my shipping manifest. But I swear on my mother's grave that I never told anyone what I was hauling, never left my paperwork unattended, never did anything that would compromise the load. The whole investigation felt like they were trying to pin this on me, like they thought I was somehow involved in my own robbery. My company's security department pulled my driving records, my phone records, even my financial statements, looking for evidence that I'd conspired with the thieves. It was humiliating and terrifying at the same time, because I realized that even though I was the victim, I was being treated like a suspect. What really gets to me is that nobody can explain how I bought fuel at a station that was supposed to be abandoned. The credit card transaction went through. There's electronic proof that I paid for diesel at that location at 11:47 p.m. But according to everyone else, that was impossible. The power company said the electricity had been shut off to that building 8 months earlier. The petroleum distributor said they hadn't delivered fuel there in over a year. Even the credit card company couldn't explain how the transaction was processed from a location that supposedly had no working equipment. I started doing my own research, driving back out there during the day to see the place for myself. What I found was exactly what the police had described: a boarded up, obviously abandoned gas station with weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. But I could still picture exactly where I'd parked my truck, where those flickering lights had been, where that old man had stood watching me drive away. I took pictures, measured distances, tried to find some evidence that what I remembered had actually happened. The only thing I found was a small piece of broken glass near where I thought the fuel pumps had been. But that could have been there for months. I kept that piece of glass though, because it's the only physical proof I have that I'm not completely crazy. The worst part about all this is how it's affected my life. I can't drive past any gas station late at night without getting panic attacks. My hands start sweating, my heart races, and I have to pull over until it passes. I've been driving trucks for 12 years, and I've never been scared of anything on the road. Not bad weather, not crazy drivers, not even the rough neighborhoods I've delivered to. But now I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my mirrors, convinced that someone is watching me or following me. My wife says I've changed, that I'm jumpy and paranoid all the time. She's not wrong. I wake up in cold sweats, dreaming about that old man's dead stare and the sound of my boots echoing on that cracked asphalt. I've started carrying a baseball bat in my cab, even though I know it probably wouldn't help if something like this happened again. The company finally let me back to work after the insurance investigation concluded they couldn't prove I was involved. But they only give me short local runs now. They don't trust me with high-value loads anymore, and I can't really blame them. Word gets around in this industry, and other drivers look at me differently now. Some think I'm lying about what happened, others think I was in on it, and a few believe me but act like I'm cursed or something. I've tried to move on, to convince myself it was just a bizarre coincidence. Maybe there was some kind of temporary setup at that location. Maybe the old man was just a caretaker or squatter. Maybe there's a logical explanation for everything. But deep down, I know something supernatural happened to me that night. I've heard stories from other drivers over the years about strange encounters on the road, ghost hitchhikers and phantom truck stops, and things that don't make sense. I always thought they were just tired drivers letting their imaginations run wild. Now I'm not so sure. There's this trucker forum online where people share their weird experiences, and I've been thinking about posting my story there, but every time I start typing it out, I delete it because I know how crazy it sounds. Who's going to believe that I got robbed at a gas station that didn't exist? Hell, sometimes I don't even believe it myself. But then I remember that credit card transaction, those fresh scratches on my trailer lock, the way that merchandise was rearranged to hide the theft. Someone or something stole my cargo that night, and they did it in a way that defies all logic and reason. I just wish I knew who they were and how they pulled it off. What really haunts me is the precision of it all. These weren't random thieves who got lucky. They knew my exact route. They knew when I'd be running low on fuel, and they somehow created an entire fake gas station just to trap me. I've been going over the details obsessively, trying to figure out how they could have planned something so elaborate. The more I think about it, the more convinced I become that they'd been tracking me for hours, maybe even days before that night. My GPS showed I was supposed to stop at a different truck stop about 30 miles earlier, but there was construction that forced me to take a detour. That detour is what made me run low on fuel in the first place. But now I'm wondering if that construction was even real, or if it was part of their plan to force me onto that specific stretch of highway. I've driven back through that area twice since then, and I can't find any evidence that there was ever any roadwork. The highway looks like it hasn't been touched in years. It's like they created an entire alternate reality just to rob me, then erased all traces of it afterward. The thought that someone has that kind of power, that kind of organization, scares me more than anything else about this whole situation. The strangest thing happened last week that's got me even more freaked out. I was at a legitimate truck stop in Oklahoma, filling up during the day, when this younger driver approached me. He said he'd heard about what happened to me through the trucking grapevine, and he wanted to tell me something. Apparently, his cousin had a similar experience about 6 months ago on a different highway, got low on fuel, stopped at a gas station that seemed out of place, had his cargo stolen while he was inside, paying, but when he tried to report it, he ran into the same problem I did. The gas station had supposedly been closed for months. No record of the transaction, no way to prove what had happened. The insurance company refused to pay out, and his trucking company fired him for filing a false claim. This guy's cousin ended up losing his house, his family, everything, because nobody believed his story. The young driver looked me dead in the eye and said there were rumors about other incidents. Always the same pattern: isolated drivers with valuable cargo, phantom gas stations, perfect thefts with no evidence left behind. He said there was talk in some of the driver forums about an organized group that had figured out how to make trucks and cargo disappear without a trace. Before he walked away, he handed me a piece of paper with a phone number on it and said if I ever wanted to talk to other drivers who'd been through this, I should call that number. I've been staring at that phone number for a week now, scared to call it but unable to throw it away. Part of me wants to know if there are really other drivers out there who've been through what I experienced, but another part of me is terrified of what I might learn. What if this is bigger than just a few random thefts? What if there's some kind of network out there that's been targeting truckers for years, using technology or methods that nobody understands? I keep thinking about that old man's face, how he seemed to know I was coming, how he made that phone call right after I paid. Maybe he wasn't just calling to report that I was leaving. Maybe he was part of something much larger and more organized than I ever imagined. The thought that there might be dozens or even hundreds of drivers who've been victimized by these people makes me sick to my stomach. But it also makes me feel less crazy, less alone in this nightmare. Last night I finally worked up the courage to dial the number, but it just rang and rang with no answer. I tried again this morning and got the same thing. Either the number's been disconnected, or whoever's supposed to answer it only takes calls at certain times. I'm going to keep trying, because I need to know if what happened to me is part of something bigger. The thing that really gets to me is that I'll probably never know the truth about what happened that night. I can investigate all I want, call all the numbers I can find, but I'm just one guy trying to make sense of something that might be beyond my understanding. Maybe that gas station was real and the authorities are covering it up for some reason. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate illusion created by people with technology I can't even comprehend. Or maybe I really am losing my mind, and everything I remember is just the product of stress and exhaustion. But I know what I saw, what I experienced, and I'm not going to let anyone convince me otherwise. All I can do now is keep driving, keep watching my back, and hope that whatever happened to me that night was a one-time thing. Sometimes when I'm driving through the desert late at night, I catch myself looking for that exit sign, that flickering neon light in the darkness. Part of me is terrified of seeing it again, but another part of me almost wants to, just to prove to myself that it was real. I guess I'll spend the rest of my driving career wondering if I'll ever find that place again, or if those people are still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to run low on fuel in the middle of nowhere. All I know for sure is, That I'll never stop at an unfamiliar gas station alone at night again, no matter how empty my tank gets.